My name's Gareth Hulmes. I'm the Certification Scheme Manager for Sabre at BRE Global. Sabre's already cropped up a few times today in various people's presentations. So it's a scheme for security risk management in the built environment, and it stands for Security Assurance by BRE. Now I'll touch on the choice of terminology assurance a bit later in the presentation. But first I'll give you a brief introduction to what the scheme is and why it's come about. So it's an assessment and certification scheme for security risk management in the built environment. So that means it applies to new and existing buildings. In fact, any type of building, infrastructure or managed civic space, Sabre can be applied to. Gavin and Charlene have already mentioned that Sabre is very similar to BREEAM in the way that it operates, and as such it's led by an independent registered assessor. Now, BREEAM has recently celebrated its 25th year in operation, and for much of that time it's been used by local authorities to increase sustainability performance of its new developments. Sabre's less than a year old at the moment. It was launched in December last year, and it was formally published in March this year, so technically we're only about half a year old. But throughout BREEAM's lifetime, we've seen the creation of numerous sustainability bodies. There's 6 there, which have the objectives of raising standards of sustainability across the world. Some of those are national schemes from abroad, some are international, some are UK. There's plenty more where they came from. All these have been created since BREEAM was conceived in the late 80s, early 90s. And unfortunately, we just don't have that same wealth of company and breadth of companies in the UK, or well, internationally really, that are doing the same thing for security. And that's somewhat symbolic of the two industries. Security is perceived by many to be a long way behind sustainability and other business disciplines such as quality and health and safety, all of which have had ISO management systems established for many, many years. We just can't say the same in security. So that's why Sabre was created. It's to fill that vacuum that's existed for a long time and add some logic to the way we treat security on our new and existing developments. So there were several objectives that we had right at the centre of the development of the standard. It was critical that the standard we developed allowed users to measure, evaluate and compare performance of their assets, because you can't improve something unless you know its current performance. It had to allow market recognition of their effort towards security risk management in buildings. And it had to encourage best practice during both the planning, design and construction of new buildings, but also the occupation of existing buildings. And challenge the market to innovate, basically to solve old problems in new ways that are more efficient and effective than the way we have been doing previously. It allows users to demonstrate their commitment to security. Currently, there are very few ways that developers can prove that they've taken a responsible approach to security at their developments. More often than not, it's their own word, and obviously there's very little independence there when it comes to, can you trust someone who says they've done a good job of security? Of course they would say that, especially if they're trying to sell you space in their asset. But we also want to raise the profile of security, and that's on many levels, both in terms of standards, professionalisation of individuals in the industry, but also the approach, to develop a more mature approach so that we can be sure that the results we're getting out of the process are better. But in order to measure security, we first have to come to an agreement over what good security is. Now, many people have a different understanding of security, especially in the built environment context, and what it actually means. But really, good security design is no different from good design. And good design is pretty well summarised in the MPPF and MPPG, in that it complements other planning objectives. Security has to do that. It enhances the quality of buildings and space. It's efficient, effective, appropriate, proportionate and commensurate. It promotes well-being, that's a pretty critical one for security, and it addresses a range of views and needs of stakeholders involved in a given development. But how is a planning professional supposed to recognise good design when they see it on the development proposals that land on their desks on a daily basis? How do they know whether that proposal contains good security design? Now, these are some of the visual manifestations of security, some of which you'll see on drawings or described in supplementary documents, but cameras, bollards, locks, doors, specifications of glazing, card readers, etc. All these things are indicative that security has been thought about, but the simple presence of those measures themselves do not tell you whether there is good security design. You could have terrible security design and still have all of those things on your technical drawings or visible on an existing building. What we really need to do to establish whether there is good security design present is look at the process, the thinking behind the measures that are there. Because it's all very well spending 250k on security equipment, but if it's been misdirected, people will be under a false sense of security that security has been dealt with when in fact it hasn't. So we need to understand that the measures that are put into our buildings today are reasoned and documented. So this is about gathering our security requirements. What must security at a building do? About planning security, so taking those security needs and translating them into a series of measures that help us to reduce our risks. Implementing those plans, and particularly in the case of in-use buildings, monitoring the effectiveness of those measures. And as threats change and trends emerge, changing our strategies and our policies and procedures to adapt to that change in need. So the focus of SABRE is really on security risk management. That's the key terminology there. That's on the basis that management systems approaches generally offer the most appropriate and effective solution because they're targeted towards the need. Helps us avoid misdirecting resources. So if we can establish what our risks are and focus both our monetary and time resources on reducing those risks, we're not spending money on other areas where we've actually got no benefit to gain. That comes on to maximising our benefit and obtaining best value for money. But last but certainly not least, security is different for every development. And it doesn't matter whether it's 2 office blocks, because physically speaking, they have to be in 2 different locations. So whether it's due to location, proximity to sensitive buildings or landmarks, the likely profile of the occupier who's going to be using that building, all of these things influence the security needs. So there can be absolutely no one-size-fits-all approach to security. So any guidance or standards that say if you're an office building you should have these measures, if you're a library you should have these measures, it might work for some, but it certainly cannot work across the board. Every building deserves to be looked at in its own right because there may be something specific about that development that makes it different from something which on paper looks identical, but isn't. So how do we turn that into a standard which the market can use to improve security for their built assets? Well, we take the steps of this plan, do, check, act cycle, and we map them against a technical framework which is consistent with both ISO 31000 risk management and the commonly accepted stages of the construction management cycle. So all of this is familiar to the development community. We're not introducing anything new or any stages that haven't been worked through before. I'll briefly explain the various sections that we've got in this framework, but there are around, for new facilities, 110 credits within the scheme. So I'm not going to go through all of those, but I'll touch on the areas which you can probably predict actually. Up at the top, establishing our security requirements. So that's who we are, where we are, what's near us, what might affect the security threats that this building will face over its lifetime. And then using that information to develop a security risk assessment. A security risk assessment is absolutely essential in SABRE. You cannot start investing money in security measures until you know what it is you're addressing, what problems you've got and how you can address them. Once we've established what measures are necessary to reduce our risks to an acceptable degree, we can then start to think about a strategy. How do we apply that to our building? And how do the spatial, technical and physical measures, along with the people and procedural elements, come together to provide something that is likely to work? And then we move through into the bottom, which is actually implementing those measures, the project management section. There are a couple of sections there which only apply to in-use facilities, but project management is the section that applies to new facilities. This is where the scheme again looks very similar to BREEAM. We have 5 ratings from acceptable through to outstanding. And the scheme rewards basically the top 50% of performers. The bottom 50% can still go through the scheme to establish where they lie, but they won't be rewarded with certification or a SABRE rating until they meet the top 50%. So from 50% acceptable, you can make your way up through the grades up to outstanding, and we share those star ratings with BREEAM as well. We quality audit every assessment report that comes into us from our registered assessors, so there are multiple layers of audit and checking going on. And assessments which are successful and approved by BRE are rewarded with certification, which is listed on the redbooklive.com website. So if anyone's claiming they have SABRE certification, it's very easy for built environment professionals to verify those claims by visiting our website. We also made sure during the development of the scheme that this was adoptable and acceptable to everyone that's already operating in the community. So it was developed with various stakeholders in mind. We adopted many of the features of BREEAM. It's very well established. Many people understand it and work on it on a daily basis. We didn't need to introduce a new methodology for a scheme delivery, so we used a very similar format to BREEAM. We managed to develop a single set of criteria that can be applied both to new and in-use facilities, and as far as I'm aware, it's the first security standard out there that is capable of doing that. And that's quite good in that it lets developers build according to the standard, and it also gives subsequent occupiers the ability to continue that certification in use and demonstrate their commitment to security as well. Through the credit award and weighting schemes, we've been able to encourage earlier and better engagement of both public and private sector security expertise and competent persons at the necessary stages of the process. That's in terms of threat assessment, risk assessment, development of security strategies, all of which have to be done by someone who understands that landscape, i.e. a security professional. But also to make sure that it's suitable for use by planners, by developers, by anyone who wants to benchmark performance or ensure a given level of performance by a project team or by a security delivery team. So in terms of encouraging earlier and better engagement of security expertise, this is, broadly speaking, and it differs for every project, but the current arrangements of security in the plan of work. You'll see the security professional, security consultant in the centre there. They're not a mandatory part of the process. There's nothing that says you have to employ a security member on the project team for a new development. If that does occur, from my experience, having been in consultancy in a previous job, if it does happen, it tends to happen relatively late, probably towards the end of REBA stage 3, normally after a planning application's been submitted, or certainly once the concept design has been almost set in stone. It really leaves very little opportunity for a consultant to add value to that scheme. They effectively become an M&E engineer for the security equipment, and that's really not making the best out of the security professionals in the marketplace. By working to the SABRE framework, if a developer is going to be successful with SABRE certification, they really have to bring forward that involvement of a security professional, and it effectively becomes a mandatory part of the process. So if you want to ensure that security is considered early doors by a professional with the right competence, then by following the SABRE framework, you can add that level of assurance in. Obviously, we get another role at the top, the SABRE assessor, who's there throughout the process, performing the exact same role as the BREEAM assessor, which is collecting evidence, making sure that the people in the project team have delivered the right information at the right time, prepared by the right people. Got the two red bars there, which are roughly where the certification intervals lie. So you can obtain design stage certification and as-built certification using SABRE, and that tends to be around REBA stage 4, or once the technical design's been outlined. And obviously at handover, that's when the as-built certification is issued. And this is useful for planners and developers for a number of reasons. It can assist planners in terms of setting validation requirements. So if you want to ensure that developers are thinking about security before they dump the planning application on your desk, then validation requirements to encourage them to go through perhaps SABRE pre-assessment or to conduct various parts of the SABRE framework That can be used in validation requirements. Planning conditions for outline, full stroke reserve matters. The design stage and as-built certification stages are useful there. They can be used within planning conditions. And in terms of developers, pre-qualification questionnaires, RFPs, SABRE ratings can be stipulated to ensure that a given level of capability is coming back from people seeking to join the project team for new developments. And through that simple SABRE rating scheme, it's really designed to make life easier for everybody. Rather than planners and developers have to learn what the ins and outs of security and the technical issues, that's really dealt with by the SABRE rating system. You can trigger a given level of performance by asking for a SABRE rating in return from developers. And the certification that results from that comes from LPCB, which has been, under various guises, been going for over 100 years internationally in the area of fire and security. So it's a very well-trusted certification globally. And because SABRE is process-based rather than security measure-based, so if you read the SABRE scheme, you will not see a mention. I don't even think the word door is in the 200-page document. We don't focus on products whatsoever. We simply direct the project team to go through a specific process and involve competent persons at the right time. And by virtue of doing that, you would expect to get positive results out at the back end. So it works both for low, medium and high risk sites because it's focused on process, not products. And it delivers a range of benefits, and these will vary depending who you are or what your building is or what, who's occupying your building. But developers, local authorities, regulators, landlords, tenants, all potentially have something to gain from the use of SABRE, including improving design and construction quality, enhancing marketability of built assets, demonstrating independent assurance that someone else is saying their efforts of security are good, potential for insurance incentives. We're discussing this with a national reinsurer currently, but also with independent insurers of people going through the SABRE process. So we hope to be able to announce some good news stories in that area in the near future. And as Nick Bennett from Canary Wharf said in an earlier presentation, the occupiers of Canary Wharf are asking, or potential occupiers of Canary Wharf are asking about security. What are Canary Wharf doing? And I don't think Canary Wharf are alone. I think people are becoming more mindful of security, especially when they're paying lots of money to occupy buildings on long-term leases. There's very few ways at the moment to demonstrate credibly how you've dealt with security to an international market, and we think we've been able to do that relatively simply with SABRE through the certification system. I think we're just about on time, 1 minute over. That's a very brief introduction to SABRE and how it can fit into the planning system. There's a lot more to be said about the in-use part of the scheme, which I've not gone into today because today's got much more of a planning focus. But if anyone's got any questions about SABRE or how they can use it, we do have more documentation and information that we can share with you. Or I can take questions in the drinks reception. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.